I've got a couple other sources I want to share with you. So I've got also, uh, there's this book called The Timelines of the Western Church, I guess by Susan Lynn Peterson. It's very affordable. Zondervan. It's like just, paper like that, really easy. It's not heavy. It's paperback. And it's really great because you've got table contents in here that show it's the Western church, so not just the Eastern, but you've got right here, you've got a breakdown of different Bible versions like King James, but you've also got denominational charts for all these different denominations, charts that show you, okay, Baptist in what region, when did they begin, how did they split, where did they go later on, and you've got it even goes through the Vikings ages, it goes through the whole church history. I've also got this one here. This is just one of many sources like this, Oxford Bible Atlas. And here, of course, you've got uh, it being an atlas. You have maps, of course. This is stuff you would find just in basic in the back of your Bible in the back of a pew, honestly. But it's really nice, and it's Oxford, of course, Oxford University Press. This is dime a dozen. You can find things like this. I'm mentioning these things because these things are available. We do have really good evidence. Here's another one of my favorites. This one's called A Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs, a reference guide to more than 700 topics discussed by the early church fathers. So this goes back to your question, Charles, about, why were the fathers so important? So right here, that David Burcott is the editor. You have several different authors in here, and he's an Anglican priest and an attorney. And so I've got a couple of places marked, like, for example, the ones I find fascinating. Um, Here, the doctrine of the Eucharist. You have the doctrine of the Eucharist. Protestants don't like hearing this, but the doctrine of the Eucharist is present even in Ignatius of Antioch. So let me show you here. I'll show you the window here, right here. If we go to the Ignatius of Antioch, he is in the Patristic Era. He's right here. He died around 117. We can see that he writes about church hierarchy. He was martyred, thrown to wild beasts and Colosseum, unfortunately. But up here, we're also told here that along with Ignatius, along with Polycarp and Papias, Ignatius and Polycarp were both said to be disciples of the Apostle John. Apostle John is the latest surviving apostle. He was the only apostle to die a natural death. And he was the apostle whom Jesus loved. And you have Ignatius, who is a disciple of the Apostle John. What better credentials can you get than that? Right here. And Ignatius says this: the Eucharist, the real presence for Catholics, the theory they believe about the Eucharist and communion is right here. He says, quote, "I desire the bread of God, the heavenly bread, the bread of life, which is the flesh of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." So he doesn't say who is. It's not as if it's symbolic. The bread of God, who is. He's which is this actual bread right here in my presence. This bread is, which is the flesh of Jesus Christ and the Son of God. And you see later authors like Augustine discussing, of course, that's 300s and so on. You've had a couple of centuries past, but you have Augustine saying, woe to him uh, who denies that this is the true body and blood. So Augustine would be on that latter end of church fathers. But if we're just taking him to be a theologian, if we're following this right here, but yeah, so that's really significant. I like that source. There's another source here I really like. This one's called The New Testament in Antiquity, a survey of the New Testament within its cultural context. It's really nice. This would be like a textbook you could assign just a New Testament class, but I like it for its cultural context and historical context. You can see it in comparison. I think in some colleges these days, they did this at my college. They would assign you, say, New Testament and Old Testament, but they would make it like a literature class in order for accreditation things in order for it to be able to transfer to like a state school, a public school. And so that may change the you know, the feel of the class into like a literature class. And so for any literature, you would have, its cultural context. So there you go. There are these other sources I want to point out. I promise I'll be done point out sources here in a sec, but there's this one, Christianity Through the Centuries. I probably should have began with this because this is a standard textbook. I actually had a friend this is the textbook, as you can see, third edition, revised, expanded, more than 200,000 copies of print. That was 25 years ago. This is standard for Protestants. And I was assigned this in Protestant seminary. And the problem with this is just like the problem with many things in general. They have a Protestant bent. They, as you grow up as a Protestant, really all that you are taught is in church history is the resurrection happened, something with the apostles, who knows what. And then Martin Luther came along. That's like church history. So that's in keeping with that. So when I did the diaconate class, I actually assigned this book instead, A Concise History of the Catholic Church. I'm not 100% happy with it because there's some things in here that, again, are a little bit slanted and biased against a conservative position of the church. But I do like it for this one reason. First of all, it's revised. It's pretty standard as well. I like it because this is also from about 20 years ago. I like it because at the end of the book, it gives a really nice treatment of, if you're interested in recent Catholic history, of 20th century Catholicism. And in fact, it gives a really nice treatment of classifying, this is my favorite part, classifying the cardinals, at least the cardinals at that time, 20 years ago, according to whether liberal, middle of the road, or conservative. And it sort of gives a prediction of after John Paul II dies, who's going to be the next pope. So that's a really cool thing. Here I have a couple of things here. So 3 more books, I promise. This will be short. 2 of them here. This one, The Fathers of the Church by Pope Benedict. We actually assigned this to the seminarians at St. Mary's Seminary. Readings from all the church fathers. And these actually come from Pope Benedict XVI. This one, on the restoration of Christian philosophy, in Latin, the title will be Aeterni Patris. Comes from Pope Leo XIII. As you can see, the date there, 1879, quite old. But he also mentions many, many church fathers. I mentioned that I like this one, Restoration of Christian Philosophy, of course. Myself being a Christian philosopher, of course, eventually he's going to say that Thomas Aquinas is the best. And, I agree with him. And this is what spurred on, modern day 20th century Thomism and our session with St. Thomas Aquinas. This is his fault. But before he gets to Aquinas, he name drops and discusses like a ton of church fathers, and it's good for that, just like with Pope Benedict the 16th. Finally, this one I recently got, The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark. He recently passed away. He was at Baylor as a researcher. He's a sociologist. Now, the reason why I like this one is because it gives, he's trying to explain, like we said here with our chart, right at the beginning, how they went from being a tiny minority to a major player, becoming a majority. What do we mean by becoming the majority? To what extent were they the majority? We have numbers for that and estimates. So here he shows us that if you assume around the year 40 AD, that maybe there were about 1,000 Christians, because Jesus appeared to 500. And then you kind of extrapolate from that. They were really only around Palestine. And then towards the end, we are told that they were a majority. You see down here, 350, right here. 350. We can estimate that the population of the empire was about 60 million. So a bare majority, that is about 56%, would have been 33 million. And just to look at that growth chart, I'll take it off the screen now, but you can pause the video when you replay it to look at that growth chart. Now, many people, and this gets a little bit into the history of Constantine, but many people want to say that Constantine is responsible for having launched Christianity into its greatness and become such a great religion and so on. he argues, Rodney Stark, and he's not the only one, many other people argue this, that Constantine was actually responding to something that was already happening. He's not the one who was the catalyst for everything, but he actually is something that just, accepted it, and, it can, acknowledge something that was already happening, that Christianity was already becoming a majority. And so being a sociologist, looking at empirical data, he's the one, he doesn't, historians, what they do is they don't just report the facts. They also try to interpret those facts. But a sociologist, and a sociologist of history, actually wants to look at the empirical data and, extrapolate from that. So that's what he's doing there. So that, I think, is really, really helpful. All that to say, we have a lot of sources. I just gave you, I'm probably putting you to sleep just telling you about one, maybe half a dozen. And there are thousands of resources out there that can tell us all about church history. Um, we know these things, we know when they happen and everything.